Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and I'm really excited about this week's episode because it's a new year, and that often means that people are making changes and looking for fresh starts. So it's very fitting that our guest this week is a career expert. And we're going to talk to her about the mistakes that even smart people make in their career. Yes, guilty as charged. I have definitely done it. And how you can get the best out of your career and your team this year. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump into what promises to be a really fascinating discussion. Her name is Caroline Ceniza-Levine, and she is the founder of the Dream Career Club, a career coach, writer, and media personality on career issues. She is a senior contributor to Forbes Careers and an adjunct at Columbia University. Caroline helps experienced professionals in tech, media, financial services, and other industries make a great living doing work they love. And don't we all want that? Amen. So welcome to the show, Caroline. It is so great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And here's hopefully better than 2020. Here's hoping, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So just to get us started, and I ask everybody this as my first question, because, hey, it's the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. So what does positive leadership mean to you personally, Caroline?
So I think as a leader, I look at it as bringing out the best in everyone around you. And so that includes people who are working, on your team, but also your peers who you are influencing just by your positivity. And then, of course, even people above you, people that you're reporting to and they're reporting to, and just really being able to look at people for their strengths, to develop and build on their strengths, and also to focus on your own strengths and build on those.
Yeah, I love that. And you make a really interesting point there, because you're almost talking about that 360, right? And sometimes we think as a leader, well, okay, it's about helping people be the best they can be, but that means my team, the people that work, for me. But it doesn't have to be limited to that, right? We can be a leader even upwards. We can help bring the best out, like you said, in peers, in the people that we work for as well. We can actually have a 360-degree influence in our leadership if we're choosing that positive route. I love that. That's really an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and from a practical perspective, I mean, it's very rare that we're only going to be working on something that affects the people right around us. A lot of work these days is cross-functional. So it's not just about your department, it's not just about your team. And so the person who really is able to have that wide network of genuine supportive relationships, and again, positivity is going to be so helpful to that, because at the end of the day, it's people working with people, and people want to like the people that they work with. And so you definitely want to leave, around you a wake of just happy, positive feelings, because that's how you'll get stuff done.
Exactly. Well, and I love the simplicity that you bring to this. People want to like the people they work with. I mean, yes, right? It ain't rocket science. It's like, let's just be nice to one another and actually enjoy our work and the people we work with. I just love that. So talk to us a little bit about, how to get the best, get the best from your team, the best way to ensure positive results from them. And even if that means just your team, or as you said, if you're working in these cross function or cross team projects, which, as you note, are just so common these days, right? It's rare that we're just working in a little silo of our own.
Yeah. So something that I always point out to managers that I'm working with, whether they're, new to being a manager or they might be a very experienced manager, is that the way you like to be managed isn't the way everybody else likes to be managed. And it's also not the way that everyone needs to be managed. So I think that everyone says they don't want a micromanager, right? Like who would raise their hand and say, "Oh, I want a micromanager." But the reality is that sometimes you don't know what you're doing. Sometimes you're new to an area or you're the last person on a project and you need to get up to speed, and you would actually benefit very much from someone who would take you by the hand and really walk you through, this is how things get done. These are the people that you need to impress or that you need to talk to. I think we can all appreciate that. We don't associate that with micromanagement, but that is a more direct way of managing. And I find that sometimes managers are so concerned about being liked, about being friendly with their team, about boosting morale and about, cheerleading, that they don't do enough direction. They don't do enough training. They don't tell people, what it is that they want. And then on the flip side, sometimes you have people, they can just take it and run with it. You can see that they are very, very effective. And so maybe your natural inclination is to manage a little bit too closely and you have to step back. So the point is that don't just fall into what's habitual to you, what you think you want. You need to look at the person that you're dealing with. And if you have multiple people on your team, that means the one, two, or three individuals, right? Not everyone is the same, and you have to manage that way.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no cookie cutter approach to leadership. I completely agree. And it's funny, you said, a lot of managers are just worried about people liking them. And we did just say that a moment ago, right? Like people want to like who they work with. So it's not that they shouldn't want that. It's just that that shouldn't be the goal, right? And it is about this individual approach to leadership. What do the people on this team, what do each of them need from me? And I guess at face value, that can sound kind of overwhelming if you're new to a leadership position, because it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this huge team and I'm supposed to figure it out individually. But actually, it starts to become pretty simple as you work and interact with people. Like, who needs more support and direction? Who just needs to, touch base with you, or, pick your brain a little bit and can be, let go to just do their thing because they've been there for years. They're really good, or they're really strategic. I mean, that is part of the leader's job, is to figure out where everybody just needs the type of support they need and the type of guidance they need, and the level of it, right? The extent.
Yeah. And you can absolutely ask your team, each person individually, what do you need? Do you have any questions? If you give them an instruction or you tell them to do things, ask them, to repeat it back to you and see if it's clear. I mean, you'll know just from that. Monitor their work. When you don't know someone very well, check in more frequently, right? Because
Mhm.
you don't know whether or not they're going to raise their hand. I remember that I had placed a pretty junior person. And the way that the department was structured was that she was reporting into someone who was quite senior. Now, he had an open door policy, and he just expected that if people had a question, they were going to walk into his office. And she, on the other hand, was brought up pretty deferentially. And so she saw him as, oh my goodness, he's at least two or three layers above me, because title wise he was, but she was his direct report. And so she wasn't stepping into his office. She felt ignored. She felt like he wasn't reaching out. He thought everything was great because
Right.
she never needed anything. And they were both kind of in this panic. And it was only when I brokered, kind of a talking to, right? That they should let each other know what it is that they need. And they ended up working really well together for years and years. And so there was no problem. But you can see how if you let things fester and you don't, bring things out in the open, you might be making assumptions that just aren't true.
Exactly. And communication, particularly in that example that you mentioned, is so crucial, right? If he had even expressed that to her, like, hey, I've got an open door policy. Don't be shy about coming in. I know you're new. And I know it might seem intimidating, but it's an open door to you and everyone else on the team. I mean, it just as simple as that, is communicating, hey, this is my style. Or asking the question, what do you need? You're new. So what do you need from me? Right. I mean, that sort of works both ways, in having those simple, really simple communication. But if you don't have it, as you said, misunderstanding, confusion, misinterpretation, and that is just one big downward spiral.
Yeah, it gets to the definition of positive, right? So in his book, no news is good news. Oh, he's not coming in here. So everything must be okay. Well, in her book, no news was he's ignoring me and my work obviously isn't valued. And so again, there wasn't an issue there. They ended up having a positive working relationship. But again, that was because they talked about it and didn't just assume.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about this, though. It's an interesting sort of dynamic that we have right now with so many people still working virtually and for the foreseeable future, right? Um, when you talk about this communication, whether it's between a leader and a team member, or even just within the team between peers, I mean, talk to us about that in terms of how do you go about that in the virtual environment? Because what you're describing is very, like, it sounds like it was very much like back in the day, back in the olden days, as I like to say, when we used to go to physical offices and
Yeah.
actually be able to walk into somebody's office, right? But now we're remote, and so you can't do that. So what's the equivalent of that? Or how do you guide teams with this in terms of this, like, communicating effectively in this virtual world?
Yeah. Well, bringing it back to again the theme of positivity, I will highlight that virtual, it's just very hard to communicate tone. Video is a flat medium. We don't have the the luxury of walking around and really assessing the pulse and the feeling of an environment. And so you really have to make an effort to be enthusiastic in the way you sound, to have gestures, to smile. Because if you don't, you still might be feeling okay, but it's really, really hard to see that um, over video, and it's really hard to hear that over the phone. So I would say that in terms of really emoting and just showing some enthusiasm and energy, you have to work a little bit harder anytime you take away the live interaction. And then secondly, and it was something, it's kind of a play in what I had said before regarding you don't manage people just the way you like to be managed, right? Don't make assumptions. It's the
Mhm.
same with virtual and remote work. Don't make assumptions that what worked before is going to work in this environment because it's a different environment. So
Mhm.
if it was okay that you only spoke to your manager once a week or you only addressed your team once a week, well, maybe that was because you would actually walk around and see them multiple times a week, but you just sat down with them once a week. Well, in the virtual and remote environment, you don't have those other multiple touch points. And
Right.
so that once a week scheduled meeting all of a sudden is so big and so
Mhm.
official, and it might not be enough. And so you have to check back in both with your manager and with your team and with your colleagues. How do you like to communicate? If I have an urgent request, if I have an ad hoc question, and people might want a text, might want an email, might want time scheduled on their calendar. Again, don't assume that what works for you works for them. Don't assume that what worked before works now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for sure, with the video calls too, right? Like I personally am just kind of allergic to Zoom. I mean, I use it, I do it. Obviously, we're recording this in Zoom right now. I'm seeing you through video chat right now. I love it. It's a fantastic tool. It has definitely helped us all keep, in touch and stay together and see each other. However, man, I don't think all calls and all meetings need to be Zoom. They just don't. Now, that's my personal opinion, But some people on my team don't feel the same way. They always want to be on Zoom and they like to have their cameras on. Whereas I'm kind of like, well, sometimes we all need our cameras on, but for the most part, if you don't want to, you don't have to, which again is my personal preference, but it's not what everybody else wants, to your point, right? So I have to be very mindful about these things. And if the group wants to do, a Zoom happy hour, which would be like, not my choice. That's great. I'm glad they want to get together, and I just, have to make the most of that and be part of it, right?
Well,
So,
you can also let your preferences be known too, because there might be
yep,
one or more other people who are also zoomed out, but might feel like they can't say anything. So,
right.
you can also, it's about just being honest with where you are, being willing to compromise, but also being willing to say, I'd love to do a phone call. Is there anybody up for just a phone call? Can we turn the
Exactly.
video off? And you know, some people might
Which
be like,
I have done. I have definitely done
yeah,
that. Absolutely. And some of the early morning, because I'm in Pacific time, it's like people I'm just not getting on camera. And believe me, it's a good thing for all of you. Okay. I'm not camera ready. Everybody should just be okay with that.
yeah, or you could, especially if you're in a crowded environment or in a noisy environment, or you're having a bandwidth issue, and you can just say, listen, I'm going to be turning my video off for a few minutes and whatever,
Yeah.
and so it's about learning how to collaborate with everybody around you. So it isn't just you giving all the time, but
Right.
also being upfront about what you need.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's about being authentic, really, about, how you're feeling and what works for you. And it's definitely a two-way street. It's not that the leader should be just, catering to everyone else's. It's like, hey, you're allowed to have a say in it too. Absolutely. So talk to us a little bit. A lot of our listeners are leaders, of course. Some of them may be considering career changes. Some of them may be considering, how do I get the next promotion? Obviously we always care about our career, right? We're always trying to think about how can I move forward? What can I do next? So talk to us a little bit about, the type of work that you do and what you talk about sometimes, which is like these career mistakes that we can kind of unwittingly make, right? Like you can be so good at what you do, so smart, and yet, ooh, career blunder just happens, right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of the overarching career mistake being that people equate doing their day-to-day job successfully as then being successful in their career. And the reality is that your career is a series of jobs, and your job is actually a series of projects and interactions and ongoing results. And so working in any one task or on any one project is not sufficient, and it's not the same as proactively managing your career. So, really thinking about what is that next step for me? Am I thinking about advancement? Am I in the right place? Am I thinking about a change, a new role, a new industry? Have I marked myself to market? I mean, let's face it, we're working for a living, right? So we're working for compensation. And many times, when you're in a company for a long time, and I put business owners in this situation as well. Maybe you have that retainer client that you've had for months and months or for years and years, and the scope has changed, and the level of effort and intensity has changed, and yet your fee schedule hasn't changed. Or an executive taking on more and more, especially with something like the pandemic. Anytime there's a shock to the system, roles change. You're asked to do more. 6 months later, you're still doing more, and your salary hasn't caught up to that. And so you have to take a 30,000-foot view and look at all of the pieces of your career as moving along a career path towards whatever goal it is that you have, and make sure you're tending to that and not just what's immediately in front of you.
I love that. So give us just like can you give us a couple of like practical tips or examples of, what does that look like? If I'm tending to my career, if I'm marking myself to market, like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah. So an example of that would be, let's say, advancing at your career. So part of that for sure is getting results, right? And so you're on this project, or maybe you're serving the company's largest or most important client, and you know that you're doing a good job at that. And that's absolutely part of managing your career. But if nobody knows you're doing a good job, then it's like that tree that falls in the
Mm-hmm.
forest and nobody hears it, right? And so I have seen situations, especially, and this goes back to the very first thing that we said, where you're not working in a vacuum. You're not only working for your boss or with one other person. Your work impacts a number of people around you. And as your job becomes more complex, as you get more senior, you're typically touching more and more people at different levels, in different roles, in different departments. And if nobody knows who you are, and if nobody knows that you're responsible for the client or you did this thing, then it isn't the same as you just having done it. Nobody knows about it. Who knows if your manager is going to tell people exactly what you do? Or frankly, if the manager noticed that you really expanded the relationship, or that the client only asks for you, or that the project is being done under budget and before the deadline, they might not notice. They have their own jobs. And so that's a really key example, is that don't assume that just because you're doing a great job that people know that.
Mm. Okay, so I'm going to press you just a little bit on that, because I'm with you completely. But when we think about that, and I think I'm going to generalize here, but I think it's more women than men that have this reaction. It's like, yeah, but how do I tell people I did all this stuff without sounding like, you know, a total show off, or just like bragging and becoming that person that people are like, oh, here she goes again, bragging about what she did. So how do you thread that needle of, I got to let people know that I did this, that I'm doing this good job, to your point, right? Like, if I got to not be the tree falling in the woods and nobody's around to know that. But how do I do it in a way that doesn't make me this like self-absorbed, you know,
Yeah,
just feeling
absolutely.
self-aggrandized because, yay, look at me, I'm doing a great job, everybody.
Well, in a nutshell, it's not bragging if it's true. And
Good
showing
point.
someone rather than telling someone is a very elegant and gentle way of getting your point across. So for example, let's take that client example where I said, okay, you are serving the company's largest and most important client, and they're only asking for you. Right? So one, you could ask the client to let your manager know that of the job that you're doing. So you can ask other people to speak up for you. The other thing is, when you have that weekly meeting with your manager, you can let them know this. So Bank Y, it turns out, is bringing in 20% of our advertising revenues this year. And our contact at Bank Y, wants to work with me specifically on everything that's going forward. So I just wanted to let you know that that is happening, right? And so
Right.
the manager is very, very clear. It's like, wow, you own this relationship. That's really important. And again, don't assume that they're going to know that. I once worked at a company where in the performance review, the manager would have to write the top 3 areas of focus, like of responsibility. So like, these are the top 3 priorities for this role. And then that person actually doing the role would also have to write what they thought their top 3 priorities were. And they wouldn't match. Sometimes you'd get 1, sometimes you'd get 2, but I never saw anybody get all 3. That doesn't
Hmm.
seem like a very difficult question. But again, in the day to day, people think, oh, I thought you really wanted me to spend the extra 2 hours on that report. And the manager doesn't really care. So until you speak up and say, I've been working on this, I've did this, I did that, et cetera, no one's going to know about it.
Right, right. And it comes back to communication, what we were talking about earlier, right? It's simple communication in this. And I love that strategy that you mentioned of having other people say it for you, right? Like, have other people be the messenger of this. And it's so easy to do that. You know, you get a client who loves you, and it's so easy to say, hey, I'm so grateful. I'm so glad that you're happy with me. I'm so glad that we have this great relationship. Any chance you might, just forward this email on to my boss, or, or send a quick note to my boss. And they're always happy to do that. Don't be afraid to ask for that. What Caroline is saying is really a wonderful strategy, to have someone else talk for you and communicate that for you.
Yeah, and if they sent it directly to you, and they are effusive in their praise and they're specific, and you really saved us a lot of money here, or you really, helped us get through XYZ, you can forward that email
Yes.
to
Hit
your
the forward button, right?
yeah, and you can say, so Joe Y at Bank Y is very happy about what we did at XYZ, but it's clear they're writing to you. This is what you did, etc. So there are
Exactly.
ways to do it that don't make you a braggart. And because we notice it, right? We all see when someone's bragging, it's the bluster. It's that it isn't specific. They're saying, I'm the greatest salesperson, instead of just saying, I sold, a follow on project to our biggest and most important client.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, something else that you talk about, Caroline, is having resilience in your career. Talk to us about that a little bit. Like, what do you mean by that? What does it look like?
Yeah. So resilience is the ability to bounce back. And
Mhm.
everyone makes mistakes. I mean, things go wrong. It's not even something you personally did potentially. It can be that the deadline changes. All of a sudden, you have to deliver something with half the amount of time. Or someone gets pulled off your team. You have to deliver it with fewer resources. Or you thought you were going to have the right numbers or enough data to make an analysis, and now you're going to have to wing it, or you're going to have to do some estimates or whatever it is. There are high stakes situations in the career: a performance review, a job interview, a salary negotiation, a business development meeting. Those are some examples of high stakes events. We can't control everything that happens, but resilience is about expanding our capacity to take on more and more, and to bounce back quickly, and to not be phased if things don't go as we had planned or as we expected. So we can't prevent everything, but we can at least grow our own capacity.
Mm. And so, when you talk about growing the capacity there, right? Because we don't want people to get burned out, though, right? Like, if we just keep saying yes, we just like, adding to what we've got on our plate. And yes, that's growing your capacity, but sometimes that can be a recipe for disaster if it's prolonged, right? So, how do you do that? How do you sort of expand your capacity, but do it in a way that doesn't potentially lead to burnout, that still allows people to thrive, to enjoy their work, to be a good leader?
Yeah, well, taking on more and more is just one way to expand capacity. And to your point, taking on other people's work is just a recipe for resentment. Taking on an unreasonable deadline is a recipe for disappointing the client and for setting a bad precedent. So there are reasons to decline if something is unreasonable, or and really doesn't fit. That's up to you as a leader. And again, this is about proactive career management, really taking that higher level view and saying, is this something that I should be doing? But taking on more, let's say that the deadline changes, and that's nobody's fault, but you
Mhm.
think that you can press it through. Obviously, taking something like that can build your capacity. Other ways you can do it that don't lead to burnout are things like agreeing to present something at the next executive meeting, right? That raises your visibility, that raises the stakes. Maybe you're a little afraid to do some public speaking. Contrary to popular belief, you won't die though, right? It's going to increase your capacity, and it's going to raise your visibility. So that's another really good example. Putting yourself out there for, more more important projects, more complex projects. It's not necessarily about working hard, but it's about saying, am I working on things that are important for the future strategy of the company? Am I working on things that
Mm,
senior leaders are really going to pay attention to? Am I promoting my vision for how things can get done? That's what differentiates the individual contributor who's only in it for themselves from the manager, from the leader, right? Who can really rally people to their specific and unique vision.
yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you clarified that. So it's really about building your capacity strategically, right? And as one of my mentors would say, it's almost like asking your question, okay, how is this serving me? And it's not meant to be sort of, a self-serving question like, ooh, how can I gain from this? It's not that at all. It's more a case of, okay, if I take this on, is that a good fit is it a good fit for me? Is it a good fit for the people that, I lead? Is it a good fit for where I want to go in my career? It's actually sort of thinking about the whole big picture. Like, how does this serve me? Is it aligned with the career? Is it aligned with the company that I work with? Does it make sense for me to do this right now? Right. And so I'm really glad you clarified that. It's almost like this being really strategic in how you're growing your capacity. If I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about saying yes for the sake of saying yes.
Right.
Sometimes the best response is no, or sometimes the best response is to turn it onto the person and help them and support them into growing their capacity. But there is also that time where you want to step up. And
Mhm.
when you take on bigger or more complex or higher stakes, there's going to be some resistance potentially, or some fear or some anxiety. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessary that you have to be comfortable all the time.
No, and in fact, I would argue that you need to not feel comfortable all the time to be growing in your career. And sometimes, a lens that I sometimes put over that is, okay, my immediate reaction to doing that was no way. But the reason that I did it, if I really am honest with myself, it's because I'm afraid. And if that happens for me, then I know I need to say yes. Because if the only reason my knee-jerk reaction is no is because I'm afraid, then it's usually something I need to do. It's usually something that's going to stretch me. It's usually something that's going to help me grow. So
Yeah,
that's just my own little personal lens. Everybody has their own way of looking at it, but that's what usually, how I approach those situations.
yeah, I also encourage people to think about, well, how can you say yes? What can you say yes to? So
Mhm.
again, it might be, well, I'm not going to do this for you, but I can sit with you, or I can give you half an hour to go over it with you, or to help you get it done. So that's saying yes to the person, but again, not absolving them of their responsibility to get something done. Or with the client, where again they put an unreasonable deadline, but maybe you've had 2 years of working together, and this is the first time that they've done that, and so you say yes, and then after the emergency has passed, put an appointment on the calendar to talk to them about going forward and how can you
Mhm.
plan better, et cetera, so that this doesn't become, say, a precedent. So
Right.
it's about, saying yes to something. Doesn't have to be the immediate request.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing either, right? Another lesson that I've been learning recently, because I'm an all in or all out kind of gal. Like, there's not a lot of gray for me. And what I've been learning recently is like the gray is okay. Like, you can still be a part of something, but not absolutely have to be 100% all part of it. So it's remembering that that's an option too, right? It's not just yes and no. It's like, yes, as you said, I can help to in a certain way. Here's how I can help you. Like you said, I've got the 30 minutes. So let's sit down and talk for 30 minutes. Let's see where we can get to, right? But that doesn't mean I'm saying, yes, I'm going to help you do your whole project, right? But I'm still going to support that person. I'm still going to be able to say yes, but I'm doing it in a way that serves me well, that still keeps things in boundaries for me and doesn't push me into that burnout, I have too much stuff on my plate mode.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh, you have shared so much wisdom today, and very actionable wisdom too, Caroline, which I really thank you for, because a lot of times, people talk in these broad generalizations about, well, we should be doing this and we should be doing that, but you've given really concrete examples, and that's really what I like to share on this show, because at the end of the day, we can all agree that something's a good idea, but the next big question is, how do I do it? And I want to thank you so much for sharing some of the hows during this show, so that our listeners really get a specific ideas, specific strategies. So thank you so much. And I know we just scratched the surface of what you do and your wisdom. So I know our listeners are going to want more of you. How can they get in touch with you? And also, I think you kind of have a very cool free offer for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you visit my site, which is just my last name, Ceniza-Levine.com, right on the homepage, you can download the 25 career mistakes that even smart professionals make. So I talk about salary negotiation, I talk about career advancement, I talk about career change, I talk about, on the job performance. So I talk about these different areas, and I just highlight some of the common mistakes that I've seen. I've worked in and around HR issues for over 20 years. So hiring thousands of people and evaluating thousands of career paths. And so I've seen that there are many, many ways to be successful. I've also seen that there are many things that can trip people up. And so just having this checklist, and you can see, like, am I making any of these mistakes? And do I need to maybe look at my career differently, do something different on the job, etc.
Oh, and I love that there's salary negotiations in there, because I think no matter who you are, no matter what level you're at, there's always something to learn there, and make sure that you're not shortchanging yourself on that one. So I love that you've got that in there. Fantastic. And are you on social media? Can people connect with you anywhere, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use LinkedIn most of all, because that's my work is in and around professional development. So that's the best way to reach me. I have a business page on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, but really more in passing. I mean, if you really want to reach me or see when I post the most updated things, it's LinkedIn, or you can contact me through my site.
Awesome. Awesome. And just for our listeners, so Caroline's last name, and this is her website too. I'm just going to spell it. Ceniza-Levine is Ceniza-Levine, Ceniza-Levine.com. And if you aren't able to catch that, if you didn't write it down, don't worry. You can always email me. So thank you again, Caroline, for being on the show. Really, it has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much from you, and I'm sure our listeners have too. And thank you, the listeners, for joining us for this episode. If you have positive leadership stories to share, or you have questions for me, for Caroline, about this week's topic, anything at all, just shoot me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you. And if you want to get in touch with Caroline and didn't get her last name written down there, you can totally email me and I will connect you to her, because as you can hear, she knows a lot. She has a lot to offer. And certainly if you are thinking about your career and how to map it further, working with your team, she works with individuals and organizations. And so you may want to get in touch with her. All right, that is a wrap for this week's episode. This is Alex Bratty signing out and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.